Jacob Mackenzie stood in the doorway of his empty kitchen, staring at the cold stove that hadn't seen a proper meal in 3 days. The silence of his ranch house felt heavier than the Montana snow that would soon blanket his land. At 34, he had built a successful cattle ranch from nothing, but right now he felt more lost than the day he first arrived in this harsh territory. His housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, had quit without warning last Tuesday. She packed her bags, muttered something about ungrateful men and frozen wastelands, then climbed aboard the evening stagecoach without looking back. Jacob couldn't blame her. The work was hard, the winters were brutal, and he wasn't exactly known for his charming conversation. But now winter was coming fast, and Jacob knew he couldn't survive it alone. Not again. He walked through his house, noting all the things that needed a woman's touch. Dust covered every surface. His clothes were piling up, torn and dirty. The kitchen looked like a disaster had hit it. And worst of all, he had no idea how to cook anything more complicated than beans and hardtack. The ranch kept him busy from sunrise to sunset. His cattle needed constant attention, especially with the cold months approaching. He had to repair fences, check on sick animals, and prepare for the harsh Montana winter that could kill both man and beast if you weren't ready for it. Jacob had tried hiring help before, but most men drifted away when the work got tough. The few who stayed wanted wages he couldn't always afford. What he needed was someone permanent, someone who would stick around and help make this house a home. That's when the idea hit him. A mail-order bride. He had heard other ranchers talking about it. Men in the territories were writing to women back east, offering marriage in exchange for companionship and help with ranch life. It seemed practical enough. He needed help, and surely there were women who needed security and a home. Jacob sat down at his kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pencil. Writing had never been his strong suit, but he needed to make a good impression. He thought carefully about what to say. The most important thing was finding someone practical. Ranch life wasn't easy, and he couldn't afford to have someone who would complain about hard work or rough conditions. She needed to be strong enough to handle the physical demands and smart enough to manage a household. He also had a specific requirement that might sound strange to some people, but it was important to him. She needed to be slim. This wasn't because Jacob was shallow or didn't appreciate women of different sizes. The truth was much more embarrassing. His bedroom still had his father's old bed, an antique piece that had been in the Mackenzie family for generations. The wooden frame had seen better days. It creaked and groaned under normal use, and Jacob was honestly worried it might collapse at any moment. He couldn't afford to replace it right now. Every spare dollar went back into the ranch. New cattle, winter feed, equipment repairs. There was always something that needed money more than bedroom furniture. If he brought home a wife who was too heavy for that old bed, he'd be sleeping on the floor on his wedding night. It wasn't romantic, but Jacob had learned to be practical about everything in his life. He started writing his advertisement, crossing out words and rewriting sentences until he was satisfied, seeking a practical, slim woman for marriage and household management. Must be hardworking and adaptable to ranch life. Honest rancher with successful cattle operation offers security, comfortable home, and devoted partnership. Write to Jacob Mackenzie, Pine Ridge Ranch, Montana Territory. He read it over several times, wondering if he should add more details about himself or his ranch. But Jacob wasn't good with fancy words, and he figured honesty was better than trying to sound like something he wasn't. The next morning, he rode into town to mail his letter to several newspapers back east. The postmaster, old Tom Bradley, raised an eyebrow when he saw the addresses. "Mail order bride, huh?" Tom asked with a knowing smile. "Mind your own business, Tom," Jacob replied, but without any real anger. Everyone in town knew everyone else's business anyway. "No shame in it," Tom said, sorting the letters. "Half the married men in this territory met their wives the same way. The other half are lying about it." Jacob tipped his hat and left the post office, already wondering if he was making a mistake. What kind of woman would answer an advertisement from a stranger? What if she was running from something back east? What if she took one look at his rough ranch and decided to get on the next train home? But as he rode back to his empty house, Jacob knew he didn't have much choice. Winter was coming whether he was ready or not. He needed help, and this seemed like his best option. Over the next few weeks, Jacob threw himself into ranch work while he waited for responses. He repaired the fence around his north pasture, checked his cattle for signs of illness, and started stockpiling hay and grain for the winter months. Every few days, he rode into town to check for mail. Tom would shake his head and tell him it was too early to expect anything yet. Letters took time to reach the East Coast, and responses would take just as long to come back. But Jacob kept checking anyway. While he waited, he started thinking about what it would be like to have a woman in his house again. His mother had died when he was 12, and since then the ranch had been a man's world. He tried to remember how his parents had worked together, how his mother had managed to make their simple cabin feel warm and welcoming. He started cleaning his house more carefully, imagining how a wife might see it. He fixed the loose board on the front porch and replaced the broken window in the spare room. He even attempted to cook a decent meal with mixed results. The old bed remained his biggest worry. Every night when he lay down, he listened to it creak and groan. He tried to convince himself it would hold up a little longer, at least until he could afford something better. Finally, after 3 weeks of waiting, Tom had a small stack of letters waiting for him. "Looks like you've got some interested ladies," Tom said with a grin. Jacob took the letters home, his hand shaking slightly as he opened the first one. Most were polite but brief. A few women asked detailed questions about ranch life and what would be expected of them. Others seemed more interested in the security he could offer than in him personally. But one letter stood out from the rest. It was from a woman named Maria in Boston. Her handwriting was neat and careful, and she wrote about wanting to start a new life far from the crowded city. She sounded practical and hard-working, exactly what he was looking for. Over the next month, Jacob and Maria exchanged several letters. She seemed perfect, eager to learn ranch life, skilled at cooking and sewing, and best of all, she described herself as petite and small-framed. By late fall, they had agreed she would come to Montana in November. Before the worst of the winter weather hit, Jacob sent her money for the train ticket and started preparing for his bride's arrival. He cleaned the house from top to bottom, bought supplies for a proper wedding ceremony, and even managed to shore up the old bed frame with some extra wooden supports. Everything was ready. All he had to do now was wait for Maria to arrive on the afternoon train. What could possibly go wrong? Elena Rossetti coughed into her handkerchief and winced at the sharp pain in her chest. The cramped apartment she shared with her sister Maria felt even smaller when she was sick, and the November cold seemed to seep through every crack in the walls. "You need to eat something," Elena said, setting a bowl of thin soup on the small table beside Maria's bed. Maria turned away, her face pale and drawn. "I can't keep anything down," she whispered. "And Elena, I need to tell you something important." Elena sat on the edge of the narrow bed they usually shared. At 28, she was 3 years older than Maria, but people often mistook them for twins. They both had the same dark hair and brown eyes inherited from their Italian mother. But where Maria was small and delicate, Elena had inherited their father's broader frame and fuller figure. "What is it?" Elena asked, smoothing Maria's fever-damp hair away from her forehead. Maria pointed weakly toward a wooden box hidden under her side of the bed. "There are letters in there. Important ones." Elena pulled out the box, surprised by its weight. Inside were dozens of letters, all addressed to Maria in a strong masculine handwriting. The return address read, Jacob Mackenzie, Pine Ridge Ranch, Montana Territory. "Maria, what are these?" "I've been corresponding with a rancher," Maria admitted, her voice barely audible. "A mail order arrangement. I was supposed to leave for Montana next week." Elena stared at her sister in shock. "You were going to marry a complete stranger?" "Without telling me?" Maria started coughing again, a deep rattling sound that scared Elena more than any confession could. When the fit passed, Maria gripped Elena's hand. "I couldn't stand this life anymore," she said. "Working 16 hours a day in that terrible factory, barely earning enough to pay rent on this awful place. When I saw his advertisement in the newspaper, it seemed like an answer to our prayers." Elena looked around their tiny apartment. The walls were thin, the neighbors were loud, and the whole building smelled of cabbage and desperation. Maria was right, this wasn't really living. "But Maria, you're sick. You can't travel anywhere right now." "That's the problem," Maria said, struggling to sit up. "He sent money for the train ticket. He's expecting me next Tuesday. If I don't show up, he'll think I changed my mind or took his money and ran. I'll have to send it back, and we need that money for rent." Elena picked up one of the letters and read it carefully. Jacob Mackenzie wrote simply but kindly about his ranch, his hopes for finding a good wife and his excitement about Maria's arrival. He sounded like a decent man, nothing like the rough cowboys she'd imagined when Maria first mentioned the arrangement. But one line made her pause. "I'm so pleased that you're small and petite, as ranch life requires someone who won't put too much strain on our resources or equipment." Elena looked down at her own body, curvier and fuller than Maria's delicate frame. She had always been self-conscious about her size, especially after years of hearing their mother worry that Elena would have trouble finding a husband because she wasn't built like proper Italian ladies. "What exactly did you tell him about yourself?" Elena asked. Maria blushed. "I may have described myself as very small and light." He seemed concerned about it for some reason. Elena felt a familiar pang of insecurity. Even in a practical arrangement with a stranger, being slim mattered more than who she was as a person. Over the next few days, Maria's condition worsened. The doctor said she had pneumonia and needed weeks of rest to recover. There was no way she could make the journey to Montana. Elena spent her days caring for her sister and her nights reading Jacob's letters. He wrote about his cattle, the beautiful Montana landscape, and his hopes for starting a family. Despite herself, Elena began to feel curious about this man and his faraway ranch. "I have to write to him," Maria said weakly one evening. "Tell him I can't come, give him some excuse." "And then what?" Elena asked. "We send back his money and stay here? You'll lose your job at the factory for being sick so long. We'll be evicted by Christmas." They sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the city outside their window. A baby was crying somewhere upstairs. Someone was shouting in the street. A rat scratched inside the walls. Elena had spent her whole life taking care of other people. When their parents died, she had worked extra hours to keep Maria in school. When Maria got sick, Elena nursed her back to health. When they didn't have enough money for food, Elena went without so Maria could eat. For once in her life, Elena wanted something for herself. She wanted adventure. She wanted to see mountains and endless sky instead of brick walls and crowded streets. She wanted to find out if someone could care about her for who she was, not just what she looked like. "What if I went instead?" Elena said quietly. Maria stared at her. "What? You're too sick to travel, but someone needs to go. He's expecting his bride on Tuesday. What if I took your place?" "Elena, you can't be serious." "You don't look anything like me. We look enough alike that people mistake us for twins all the time," Elena pointed out. "And he's never seen you in person. All he has is your written description. But I told him I was petite and small, so I'll explain when I get there. I'll tell him you got sick and sent me instead. If he doesn't want me, I'll come back home. At least we'll have tried." Maria shook her head weakly. "It's too dangerous. You don't know anything about him except what he's written in letters. What if he's not who he seems to be?" Elena had thought about that, but she had also thought about spending the rest of her life in this cramped apartment, working in factories, never seeing anything beyond these city streets. "People take chances every day," she said. "And honestly, how much worse could it be than this?" Maria was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "If you're really serious about this crazy idea, you need to know something else." "What?" "I've been writing to him as if I know how to cook and manage a household. But Elena, you know I can barely boil water without burning it. You're the one who keeps us fed and takes care of everything." Elena smiled. "So I'm actually better qualified than you?" "Are." And I told him I know how to sew and mend clothes. I've been sewing since I was 10 years old, and I said I'm good with animals. I helped take care of Mrs. Murphy's chickens when we lived next door to her." Maria looked at her sister with new eyes. "You really could do this, couldn't you?" Elena felt a flutter of excitement mixed with terror. "Maybe, if I'm brave enough to try." Over the next 2 days, they planned carefully. Elena would use Maria's train ticket and letters of introduction. She would explain the situation when she arrived, hoping Jacob would understand. If he rejected her, she would use the return portion of the ticket to come home. Elena packed her few good dresses, her sewing supplies, and her mother's recipe book. She left most of their money with Maria for rent and medicine, taking only what she needed for the journey. The night before she left, Elena sat by Maria's bedside, suddenly scared of what she was about to do. "What if he takes one look at me and sends me away?" she asked. "Then you'll come home and we'll figure something else out," Maria said, squeezing her hand. "But Elena, what if he doesn't?" What if this is the best thing that ever happened to you? The next morning, Elena stood on the train platform with her small suitcase, wearing Maria's best traveling dress. It was a little tight across the chest and hips, but it would have to do. As the train pulled away from Boston, Elena watched the city disappear behind her. For the first time in her life, she was completely on her own, heading toward an uncertain future with a man who was expecting someone else entirely. But instead of feeling scared, Elena felt alive. Whatever happened in Montana, it had to be better than the life she was leaving behind. The train rolled west, carrying her toward a new life she had never dared to dream possible. Jacob paced the wooden platform of Pine Ridge Station, checking his pocket watch for the 10th time in 5 minutes. The afternoon train was running late, which wasn't unusual for November, but his nerves were getting the better of him. He had cleaned up as best he could for Maria's arrival. His hair was freshly cut, his beard was trimmed, and he wore his only good suit, the one he'd bought for church services and the occasional trip to town. The suit felt tight after months of ranch work, but he wanted to make a good first impression. Other people waited on the platform too. Old Pete was expecting supplies for his general store, and the banker Mr. Richards was meeting someone from Denver. But Jacob was the only one who looked like he might jump out of his skin at any moment. "Nervous about meeting your bride?" Pete asked with a knowing grin. "Just want things to go well," Jacob replied, tugging at his collar. "Oh, they will. Mail-order marriages work out fine most of the time. Look at the Johnsons, been married 15 years now, happy as can be." Jacob nodded, but he wasn't really listening. In his mind, he kept going over everything that could go wrong. What if Maria didn't like the look of him? What if she changed her mind the moment she saw the rough town and realized how far she was from civilization? What if she expected more luxury than he could provide? The train whistle echoed across the valley, and everyone on the platform turned to watch the locomotive approach. Jacob's heart started beating faster as the engine pulled into the station with a great hiss of steam and screech of brakes. Passengers began stepping down from the cars, and Jacob watched each one carefully. An elderly couple, probably visiting family, a traveling salesman with his sample cases, a young man in a city suit who looked as nervous as Jacob felt. Then she appeared in the doorway of the passenger car, and Jacob's breath caught in his throat. The woman stepping carefully down from the train was beautiful. There was no question about that. She had dark hair pinned up neatly under a small hat, warm brown eyes, and a face that was both strong and feminine, but she was definitely not the small, petite woman he had been expecting. She was average height, but with curves that her traveling dress couldn't hide. Her hips were full, her waist was narrow, and she had the kind of figure that would make any man look twice. She was the opposite of everything Maria had described about herself in her letters. Jacob stood frozen, confused and uncertain. Was this Maria? Had she lied about her appearance? Or was this someone else entirely? The woman looked around the platform uncertainly, clutching a small suitcase in one hand and what looked like a letter in the other. When her eyes met Jacob's, she seemed to recognize him somehow, and she walked toward him with obvious nervousness. "Are you Jacob Mackenzie?" she asked, her voice soft with a slight accent he couldn't quite place. "Yes," he managed to say. "Are you Maria?" She took a deep breath, and he could see her hands trembling slightly. "I'm Elena Rossetti. I need to explain what happened." Jacob felt his confusion deepen. "Elena? But I was expecting Maria." "I know, and I'm sorry for the surprise. Maria is my sister. She became very ill with pneumonia just before she was supposed to leave Boston. She couldn't travel, but we couldn't let you know in time." Elena looked around at the small crowd on the platform, then back at Jacob. "Could we talk somewhere more private? This is complicated to explain." Jacob nodded, though his mind was reeling. He picked up her suitcase and led her toward the edge of the platform, away from the curious ears of the other townspeople. "Maria was supposed to be on that train," Elena continued, "but she's been bedridden for weeks. The doctor said the journey could kill her in her condition. She was going to write and cancel everything, but—" She paused, looking down at her hands. "I convinced her to let me come instead." "You convinced her?" Jacob was trying to process this information. "So you're not Maria, but you're here to marry me?" Elena's cheeks turned red. "I know it sounds crazy, and I know I'm not what you were expecting. Maria described herself as petite and small, and obviously I'm not. If you want me to get back on the train and go home, I understand completely." Jacob stared at this unexpected woman, trying to figure out what to think. She was nothing like what he had planned for, but she had traveled all the way from Boston to help her sister keep a promise. That took courage. "Where exactly is Maria now?" he asked, still in bed in Boston, hopefully getting better. "She feels terrible about the whole situation, but we didn't know what else to do." A gust of cold wind swept across the platform, and Elena shivered. She was dressed for travel, not for Montana weather, and Jacob could see she was getting cold fast. "Look," he said, making a quick decision. "Let's get you somewhere warm and we can figure this out properly." He led her to his wagon, helped her climb up to the seat, and threw a blanket around her shoulders. As they drove through town toward his ranch, Jacob pointed out the important buildings, the church, the doctor's office, the general store. Elena looked around with wide eyes, taking in the rough wooden buildings, the dusty streets, and the vast open landscape beyond the town limits. "It's so different from Boston," she said quietly. "Different how?" "Quieter. More space. You can actually see the sky." Jacob glanced at her, surprised by the wonder in her voice. Most city women who came west complained about how empty and lonely everything looked. They rode in awkward silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Jacob kept stealing glances at Elena, trying to reconcile this curvaceous woman with the delicate bride he had been expecting. She was attractive, no doubt about that, but she was also completely wrong for his situation. The bed. He kept coming back to the bed. That old frame could barely support his own weight, and he was a lean man. Elena looked healthy and solid, the kind of woman who wouldn't break if ranch life got rough. But that also meant she was exactly the wrong size for his father's antique bed. "I should probably head back to town tonight," Elena said suddenly, as if she could read his thoughts. "I can get a room at the hotel and catch the next train east." "The next train isn't until Thursday," Jacob told her. "And there's a storm coming in." "Look at those clouds." Elena looked up at the darkening sky where heavy gray clouds were building on the horizon. Even as they watched, the first few snowflakes began to fall. "You can stay at the ranch tonight," Jacob continued. "Tomorrow, when the weather clears, we can figure out what to do next." Elena nodded gratefully. "I appreciate your kindness. I know this isn't what you wanted." They reached the ranch just as the snow began falling in earnest. Jacob helped Elena down from the wagon and carried her suitcase to the front porch. The house looked smaller and rougher than usual, and he found himself seeing it through her eyes. It was a simple wooden structure, well built, but plain. No fancy decorations or city comforts, just a working ranch house designed for practical living. "It's very nice," Elena said politely, though Jacob could tell she was just being kind. Inside, Jacob lit the fireplace and put coffee on to brew while Elena looked around the main room. She noticed the dust he had missed, the simple furniture, and the overall masculine feel of the place. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Just me and my housekeeper, but she quit a few weeks ago. That's part of why I needed—" He trailed off, realizing how that sounded. "Why you needed a wife to take care of things," Elena finished. "I understand. It's a practical arrangement." They sat at his kitchen table, drinking coffee and talking awkwardly about her journey, the weather, and anything except the obvious problem. Outside, the wind picked up and snow began pelting against the windows. "Looks like that storm's getting worse," Jacob observed. Elena went to the window and peered out into the swirling white. "I can't even see your barn anymore." "This could go on for days," Jacob said with a sinking heart. "Montana blizzards don't mess around." Elena turned from the window and they looked at each other with the same realization. She wasn't going anywhere for a while, whether that was what either of them wanted or not. "I guess we're stuck together," Elena said with a nervous laugh. "I guess we are," Jacob agreed. Outside, the storm howled around the house, trapping two strangers together who had never planned to meet, much less spend days alone in each other's company. Neither of them could have predicted what the next few days would bring. The wind howled around the ranch house like a living thing, rattling the windows and sending snow swirling in every direction. Elena stood at the kitchen window watching the storm with growing concern. "I've never seen snow like this," she admitted to Jacob, who was adding another log to the fireplace. "This is just getting started," he replied. "Montana storms can last for days. We'll be lucky if it clears up by Thursday." Elena felt a twist of anxiety in her stomach. She had planned to stay one night, maybe two at the most. The idea of being trapped here with this strange man for days made her nervous, especially since she could tell he wasn't exactly thrilled about her presence. "I don't want to be a burden," she said quietly. "I can help with cooking and cleaning while I'm here." Jacob looked up from the fire. "You don't need to do that. This isn't your responsibility. I want to help. I'm not used to sitting around doing nothing." And it was true. Elena had been working and taking care of people her entire adult life. The idea of staying in someone's house without contributing felt wrong to her. "Well, I won't say no to a decent meal," Jacob admitted. "I'm not much of a cook." Elena smiled for the first time since stepping off the train. "Cooking I can do. What do you have in your kitchen?" They spent the next hour going through Jacob's supplies, which were basic but adequate. Elena found flour, salt, some preserved meat, eggs from his chickens, and various other ingredients. It wasn't much, but she had worked with less. As she prepared dinner, Jacob watched her move around his kitchen with surprising confidence. She seemed to know exactly what she was doing, unlike most city women he had met. Her movements were efficient and graceful, despite her obvious nervousness about the situation. "You really know your way around a kitchen," he observed. "I've been cooking since I was young," Elena explained, kneading dough for biscuits. "My mother died when I was 16, so I took over running the household. Maria was always better at other things." "Like what?" Elena paused in her work. "Reading, writing, talking to people. She's the smart one. I just know how to cook and clean and sew." Jacob frowned. Being able to run a household isn't simple work. It takes intelligence and skill. Elena looked surprised by his comment, as if no one had ever said that to her before. "Most people think domestic work is what women do when they can't do anything else." "Most people are idiots," Jacob said bluntly. "I've been trying to manage this house on my own for weeks. It's harder than running cattle." Their conversation was interrupted by a loud crash outside. Jacob grabbed his coat and headed for the door. "One of my fence posts must have come down," he explained. "I need to check on the animals." "Be careful," Elena called after him, surprised by her own concern for this virtual stranger. Jacob disappeared into the blowing snow, leaving Elena alone in the warm kitchen. She finished preparing dinner, then explored the house a bit more. It was clearly a bachelor's home, functional but lacking any feminine touches. The furniture was sturdy but plain, and there were no decorations or personal items that might give her insight into who Jacob really was. When Jacob returned an hour later, he was covered in snow and shivering with cold. "Everything all right?" Elena asked, helping him out of his frozen coat. "Lost some fence posts, but the animals are safe in the barn," he reported, gratefully accepting the hot coffee she pressed into his hands. "That smells amazing, by the way." Elena had prepared a simple but hearty meal, beef stew with fresh biscuits and preserved vegetables. They ate by the fireplace, making awkward conversation about the weather, the ranch, and Elena's journey from Boston. "Your sister really sent you all the way out here not knowing if I'd accept you?" Jacob asked. Elena bristled slightly. "Maria didn't send me. I chose to come. She tried to talk me out of it, actually." "Why did you come then?" Elena was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "Have you ever felt like you were invisible? Like you were just taking up space in other people's lives?" Jacob looked at her with surprise. He had expected her to talk about adventure or escaping poverty, not something so personal. "In Boston, I was just Maria's older sister," Elena continued. "The one who took care of things. The one who worked extra hours so she could stay in school. The one who was too big and too plain to attract a husband of her own." "You're not plain," Jacob said quietly. Elena looked at him sharply. "You don't have to be kind. I know what I look like. I know I'm not the small, delicate woman you wanted." "No, you're not," Jacob agreed, "but that doesn't make you plain." They finished dinner in thoughtful silence, both processing the unexpected honesty of their conversation. When they were done eating, Elena insisted on washing the dishes while Jacob prepared for the evening chores he could do indoors. "Where should I sleep tonight?" Elena asked as they finished cleaning up. Jacob realized he hadn't thought this through very well. His house only had 2 bedrooms, his own and a small spare room he used for storage. "The spare room needs to be cleared out," he said. "Why don't you take my room tonight and I'll sleep on the couch?" "I can't take your bed," Elena protested. "I'll be fine on the couch, absolutely not. A guest sleeps in the bed, especially a lady guest." Elena wanted to argue, but she was exhausted from the long journey and the emotional stress of the day. All right, but just for tonight. Tomorrow I'll help you clear out the spare room. Jacob showed her to his bedroom, which was as plain and functional as the rest of the house. The furniture was simple but well made, dominated by a large wooden bed that looked like it had seen better days. The bed's a bit old, Jacob said apologetically. It was my father's and his father's before that. Family heirloom, you might say. Elena looked at the antique bed frame with its worn wooden posts and sagging mattress. It definitely showed its age, but it was still better than anything she'd had in Boston. It's fine, she assured him. Thank you for your kindness. Jacob left her alone to get ready for bed. Elena unpacked a few items from her suitcase, then sat on the edge of the bed to remove her traveling boots. The day had been overwhelming, and she was grateful to finally have a moment to herself. She had just pulled off her second boot when disaster struck. The old bed frame, already weakened by decades of use and Jacob's recent attempts to reinforce it, couldn't handle the additional weight and movement. With a tremendous crash that echoed through the entire house, the wooden frame split apart and collapsed, sending Elena tumbling backward onto the now mattress-covered floor. For a moment, Elena just lay there in shock, staring up at the ceiling. Then she heard Jacob's boots pounding down the hallway. "Elena, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she called back, though she wasn't sure that was entirely true. Her pride was definitely injured. Jacob appeared in the doorway, took one look at the destruction, and stopped dead in his tracks. The family heirloom that had survived generations was now nothing more than a pile of broken wood surrounding a very embarrassed woman. "Oh no," Elena whispered, struggling to sit up among the debris. "Oh no, I'm so sorry. I broke your bed. Are you hurt?" Jacob asked again, stepping over the broken wood to help her up. "Just my dignity," Elena said, fighting back tears of embarrassment. "Jacob, I am so sorry. I knew I shouldn't have sat on it. I knew I was too heavy for an old piece of furniture." "Elena, stop," Jacob said firmly, helping her to her feet and checking her over for injuries. "This isn't your fault. That bed has been ready to collapse for months. I'm just glad you weren't seriously hurt." But Elena wasn't listening. She was staring at the broken bed frame, seeing it as confirmation of everything she had always believed about herself. She was too big, too much, too clumsy to fit into other people's lives without breaking something. "I should sleep in the barn," she said quietly. "I'll just cause more damage if I stay in the house." "Don't be ridiculous," Jacob said. "It's just a bed. It's not worth more than your safety." But even as he said it, Jacob felt a pang of loss looking at the destroyed furniture. It wasn't just a bed. It was the last piece of his father's legacy, and now it was gone. Elena saw his expression and felt even worse. "I'll find a way to replace it," she promised. "I'll work to earn the money somehow." "Elena, forget about the bed," Jacob said, though his voice was strained. "Let's just figure out where everyone's going to sleep tonight." They ended up dragging the mattress into the main room near the fireplace, where Elena insisted on sleeping while Jacob took the couch. As they worked together to make temporary sleeping arrangements, both were lost in their own thoughts. Elena was convinced she had ruined any chance of Jacob accepting her, even if she had wanted to stay. She had broken his family's furniture on her first night in his house. Jacob, meanwhile, was struggling with conflicting emotions. He was genuinely sad about losing the bed, but he was also surprised to realize that his main concern was Elena's well-being, not the furniture. As they settled down for the night, the storm continued to rage outside, trapping them together for at least a few more days. But now there was something else between them. The broken bed sitting in the bedroom like a symbol of everything that was wrong with this situation. Neither of them slept very well that night, but for very different reasons than they had expected. Elena woke before dawn to the sound of Jacob moving quietly around the kitchen. She lay still for a moment, listening to him try to make coffee without waking her. The events of the previous night came flooding back, and she felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment all over again. She had broken his family's bed. On her first night in his house. "I'm awake," she called softly, sitting up on the makeshift bed by the fireplace. "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you," Jacob said, looking over from the stove. "I need to check on the animals, and I wanted to get coffee started." Elena stood and smoothed down her wrinkled dress. She had slept in her clothes, not wanting to be too informal in a strange man's house. "The storm's still going?" "Worse than ever. We're completely snowed in now." Elena went to the window and peered out, The world had disappeared under a blanket of white. Snow was piled up against the windows and the wind was still howling fiercely. She couldn't see the barn or anything else beyond a few feet from the house. "How do you get to the animals in weather like this?" she asked. "Very carefully," Jacob replied, pulling on his heavy coat. "There's a rope strung between the house and the barn for situations like this. Easy to get lost and freeze to death otherwise." Elena watched him bundle up in multiple layers, wrapping a scarf around his face until only his eyes were visible. "Be careful," she said, and meant it. "I'll be back in an hour or so," Jacob promised. "Make yourself at home." After he left, Elena looked around the quiet house and tried to figure out how to make herself useful. She couldn't leave, couldn't stop being a burden on Jacob's hospitality, but she could at least try to earn her keep while she was trapped here. She started by making a proper breakfast. Jacob's pantry was better stocked than she had initially thought, and she found everything she needed to make pancakes, bacon, and eggs. By the time he returned, stamping snow off his boots and unwrapping his frozen scarf, the kitchen smelled like a real home. "That smells incredible," he said, hanging up his coat. "I haven't had a breakfast like this since my mother died." "How long ago was that?" Elena asked, setting a full plate in front of him. 22 years. I was 12. Elena studied his face as he ate. There was a loneliness there she recognized. The kind that came from taking care of yourself for so long you forgot what it felt like to have someone else care about you. "What happened to your father?" "He died 5 years ago. Heart attack during roundup season. That's when I inherited the ranch and that bed you—" He stopped himself. "The bed I destroyed," Elena finished quietly. "Jacob, I really am sorry about that." Jacob looked up from his breakfast. "Elena, I need you to stop apologizing for that. It was an accident, and honestly, that old thing was falling apart anyway." But Elena could see in his eyes that it had meant something to him, and she felt terrible about it. After breakfast, she insisted on cleaning the kitchen while Jacob worked on indoor ranch tasks. She was surprised by how much work was involved in maintaining a ranch even when you couldn't go outside. There were tools to repair, accounts to balance, and supplies to organize. "Can I help with any of that?" she asked, watching him mend a broken bridle. Jacob looked skeptical. "Do you know anything about leather work?" "I'm good with a needle and thread. Maybe not for leather, but I could learn." Jacob showed her some basic leather repair techniques, and Elena proved to be a quick learner. Her fingers were skilled from years of sewing, and she picked up the new techniques easily. "You're a natural at this," Jacob said, watching her make neat, even stitches in a torn saddle strap. "I like working with my hands," Elena replied. "In Boston, I did piecework sewing to make extra money. Mostly mending and alterations for wealthy ladies." "What kind of things did you mend?" "Everything. Torn seams, missing buttons, hemlines that needed adjusting. You'd be amazed how many expensive dresses need constant repair." As they worked together, Elena found herself relaxing for the first time since she'd stepped off the train. Jacob was quiet but not unfriendly. He seemed to appreciate her help, and he treated her like a partner rather than a burden. Around midday, they heard a commotion from outside. Jacob looked up from his work, frowning. "That's one of my cows," he said, grabbing his coat. "Sounds like she's in distress, in this weather. Sometimes they try to find shelter and get trapped or injured. I need to check." Elena watched him disappear into the blowing snow again, following the rope line toward the barn. She tried to keep working on the leather repairs, but she kept listening for sounds from outside. When Jacob didn't return after an hour, Elena started to worry. When he still wasn't back after 2 hours, she made a decision that probably wasn't very smart. She put on her heaviest coat, wrapped a scarf around her face, and followed the rope line out to the barn. The cold hit her like a physical blow. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked her off her feet, and the snow stung her eyes even through the scarf. But she held tight to the rope and pushed forward. She found Jacob in the barn kneeling beside a cow that was obviously in labor. He looked up in surprise when she appeared. "Elena, what are you doing out here? You could have gotten lost." "You've been gone for hours," she shouted over the wind. "I was worried." "Bessie here decided to have her calf in the middle of a blizzard," Jacob explained. "It's not going well." Elena looked at the struggling animal and made another impulsive decision. "What can I do to help?" "You don't know anything about birthing calves." "No, but I know about helping with difficult births. I assisted the midwife in our neighborhood several times." Jacob stared at her. "You did what?" "Mrs. O'Brien delivered babies for half the Italian families in Boston. She taught me to help when she needed extra hands. Birth is birth, whether it's human or animal, right? Jacob looked skeptical, but the cow was clearly in trouble, and he was running out of options. All right, but you follow my lead exactly. For the next 3 hours, Elena helped Jacob deliver a breech calf in conditions that would have sent most city women screaming. She didn't complain about the blood, the mess, or the physical demands of the work. When Jacob needed her to hold something, she held it. When he needed her to pull, she pulled. When the calf finally slipped free and took its first breath, Elena cheered as loud as Jacob did. She's beautiful, Elena said, watching the newborn struggle to stand on wobbly legs. Jacob corrected with a grin. And yes, he is. You did good work, Elena. Really good work. Elena glowed with pride. She had never felt so useful, so needed, so capable of handling whatever life threw at her. They made their way back to the house as the storm began to ease slightly. Both of them were exhausted, covered in hay and worse things, but Elena felt more alive than she had in years. I need to clean up, she said, looking down at her ruined dress. Me too. Why don't you go first? I'll heat some water for washing. As Elena cleaned herself up, she caught sight of her reflection in Jacob's small mirror. Her hair was a mess, her face was red from the cold, and her dress would probably never be the same. But her eyes were bright with accomplishment, and she was smiling. When she came out of the bedroom, Jacob was waiting with hot water and clean towels. Your turn, she said. Elena, Jacob said before heading to wash up, thank you. For helping with the calf, I mean. Most women would have stayed in the house. Most women don't get the chance to help birth a calf in a blizzard, Elena replied. It was actually kind of wonderful. Jacob looked at her for a long moment as if seeing her clearly for the first time. This wasn't the delicate, helpless city woman he had been expecting. This was someone who could work alongside him, someone who didn't break under pressure, someone who might actually belong on a ranch. That evening, they sat by the fire sharing a simple dinner and talking more easily than they had since Elena's arrival. The broken bed was still in the bedroom, but somehow it didn't seem as important anymore. Outside, the storm continued, but neither of them was in quite such a hurry for it to end. By the fourth morning, the storm had finally blown itself out. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the blessed sound of silence instead of howling wind. She sat up on her makeshift bed by the fireplace and looked around the house that had become surprisingly familiar. Jacob was already up, standing at the window with his coffee looking out at the transformed landscape. How bad is it? Elena asked, joining him at the window. 3 feet of snow, maybe more in places. It'll take days to dig out properly. Elena stared at the white world outside. Snow covered everything. The barn roof, the fence posts, even the trees. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. The train won't be running for a while, Jacob continued. How long? Could be a week or more. They'll have to clear the tracks all the way from Billings. Elena felt a strange mixture of disappointment and relief. She had been dreading the moment when she would have to leave, even though she knew it was inevitable. I'll send a telegram to Maria when I can get to town, she said. Let her know I'm all right. Jacob nodded, but he seemed distracted by something. Elena, we need to talk. The serious tone in his voice made her stomach clench with nervousness. About what? About this whole situation. About what happens next. Elena sat down at the kitchen table, preparing herself for the conversation she had been avoiding. Of course, Jacob wanted her gone as soon as possible. She had disrupted his life, broken his furniture, and forced herself into his home. Why would he want her to stay? Jacob sat across from her, cradling his coffee cup like he needed something to hold on to. I've been thinking a lot these past few days, he began, about what I really need in a wife and what I thought I needed. Elena kept her eyes on her hands. You needed someone small and delicate, someone who wouldn't break your bed or eat too much or take up too much space. That's what I thought I needed, Jacob agreed, but I was wrong. Elena looked up in surprise. These past few days, watching you work, seeing how you handle yourself. Elena, you're not what I expected, but you might be exactly what I need. Elena felt her heart start beating faster. What do you mean? I mean, I'd like you to stay, not as Maria's replacement, but as yourself, if you want to. Elena stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. You want me to stay? I want you to consider it. Really consider it. Not just as a last resort or because you don't have anywhere else to go. Elena was quiet for a long moment, turning this unexpected offer over in her mind. Jacob, you don't really know me. These few days. This isn't real life. This is just a strange situation we got trapped in. Isn't it real life, though? This is what marriage is. Working together, helping each other, dealing with whatever comes up. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. But I'm not Maria. I'm not the woman you wrote those letters to. I'm not small and delicate and easy to take care of. No, you're not, Jacob agreed. You're strong and capable and brave enough to help deliver a calf in a blizzard. You're a better cook than I ever hoped for, and you can mend things I would have thrown away. Elena, you're not what I thought I wanted, but you're what I actually need. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. This is crazy. We barely know each other. Then let's get to know each other properly. No more pretending you're someone else. No more letters written by your sister. Just you and me figuring out if we could make this work. Elena looked around the kitchen where she had felt more useful and needed than ever before in her life. She thought about the moment when she had helped bring new life into the world. Standing beside Jacob as an equal partner, she thought about how it felt to have someone appreciate her cooking, her sewing, her willingness to work hard. But she also thought about all the ways this could go wrong. Jacob, there's something else you need to know, she said quietly. Something I haven't told you about why I really came here. Jacob waited, his expression patient and encouraging. I didn't just come here to help Maria. I came because I wanted something for myself. For once in my life. Elena took a shaky breath. I wanted to know what it would feel like to be chosen, to be wanted, to be the person someone was excited to see. And I'm terrified that if I stay, you'll eventually realize you made a mistake. That you'll start to see all the ways I'm not good enough, not pretty enough, not small enough, not what you really wanted. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked around the table to where Elena was sitting. Elena, look at me. She reluctantly raised her eyes to meet his. I wrote to your sister asking for a slim, practical woman because I was scared. Scared of not being able to provide properly. Scared of disappointing someone. Scared of not being good enough myself. Elena blinked in surprise. She hadn't considered that Jacob might have his own insecurities. I thought if I found someone small and undemanding, someone who wouldn't need much, then maybe I could be enough for her. But Elena, these past few days you've shown me something different. What? You've shown me what it looks like when two people work together as equals. When they help each other instead of one person taking care of the other. I don't want someone I have to take care of. I want a partner. Elena felt something shift inside her chest like a door opening that had been locked for years. I want to try, she whispered. I want to see if this could work. Jacob smiled, the first truly happy smile she had seen from him since she arrived. So do I. They sat together in the morning sunlight, both of them a little scared and a lot hopeful. Outside, the snow was beginning to melt in places, revealing patches of brown earth underneath. So what happens now? Elena asked. Now we get to know each other properly. No more pretending, no more trying to be what we think the other person wants. Elena laughed, feeling lighter than she had in days. I have to warn you, I'm not always as brave as I've been these past few days. Sometimes I'm scared and insecure and I cry over stupid things. I have to warn you, I'm not always as patient and understanding as I've been lately. Sometimes I'm grumpy and stubborn and I don't talk for hours at a time. I snore when I'm really tired. I leave my boots wherever I take them off. I sing while I cook, and I'm not very good at it. I talk to the animals like they're people. They were both laughing now, sharing small truths that felt like the beginning of real intimacy. Elena, Jacob said, reaching across the table to take her hand. I know this is all backwards and crazy, but I'm glad you came here. I'm glad you're not Maria. Elena squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses from years of hard work, the strength that had helped her deliver a calf, the gentleness that had comforted her when she was embarrassed about the broken bed. I'm glad I came too, she said. Even if I did break your furniture. Especially because you broke my furniture, Jacob said with a grin. That old thing was never going to survive a real marriage anyway. Elena laughed, and for the first time since leaving Boston, she felt like she might actually be home, outside. The Montana sun climbed higher in the clear blue sky, melting the snow and revealing the promise of spring underneath. Inside the warm kitchen, two people who had never expected to find each other were discovering that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as disasters. The broken bed still lay in pieces in the bedroom, but neither of them was thinking about furniture anymore. They were thinking about the future, and for the first time in either of their lives, that future looked bright with possibility. 3 weeks later, Elena stood in the Pine Ridge General Store, carefully examining a bolt of blue cotton fabric while Pete watched with amusement. "You sure you need that much cloth, Elena?" he asked. "That's enough to make curtains for the whole territory." "I'm not just making curtains," Elena explained patiently. "I'm making shirts for Jacob, aprons for myself, and I promised Mrs. Johnson I'd make new dresses for her daughters." Pete's eyebrows rose. "You're taking in sewing work?" "Word gets around fast in a small town," Elena said with a smile. "Apparently there are a lot of women around here who need alterations and mending done." It was true. After Elena had helped Mrs. Johnson deliver her 4th child, word of her midwifery skills had spread quickly. Several neighboring ranch wives had approached her about sewing work. Elena had discovered there was real demand for her skills, and more importantly, it gave her a way to contribute financially to the household she and Jacob were building together. "Jacob know you're planning to work?" Pete asked, clearly fishing for gossip. "It was his idea," Elena replied, selecting thread to match her fabric. "He said I shouldn't hide my talents just because we're getting married." The word married still felt strange in her mouth. She and Jacob had agreed to take their time getting to know each other properly before making it official. But everyone in town seemed to assume they were already engaged. Elena didn't mind the assumption, especially since it meant people treated her with respect rather than suspicion. "Speaking of Jacob," Pete continued, "he's been in town all morning talking to Tom about ordering supplies. Big order from what I hear." Elena finished her purchases and headed toward the post office, where she knew she'd find Jacob. Sure enough, he was there with a list in his hand, deep in conversation with Tom about freight schedules. "Elena," Tom greeted her warmly, "got a letter for you from Boston." Elena took the letter with hands that trembled slightly. It was from Maria, the first communication she'd received since sending her own letter explaining the situation weeks ago. Jacob noticed her nervousness. "Good news or bad news?" he asked gently. "I don't know yet." Elena carefully opened the envelope and read Maria's response while both men pretended not to watch her face. "She's feeling much better," Elena announced after a few minutes. "The pneumonia is completely gone and she's back to work." "That's wonderful," Jacob said. "What does she think about our arrangement?" Elena smiled, reading part of the letter aloud. She says, "I always knew Elena was braver than she gave herself credit for. If she's happy, then I'm happy for her. Besides, I met a very nice bookkeeper at the factory, and I think ranch life might not have suited me anyway." Jacob laughed. "Sounds like everything worked out for everyone." "She also sent this," Elena said, pulling a small wrapped package from the envelope. Inside was their mother's wedding ring, a simple gold band with a tiny chip of diamond. "She said I should have it, since I'm the one getting married," Elena explained, holding the ring up to catch the light. Jacob took the ring gently, examining it with respect. "It's beautiful. Your mother had good taste. She was very practical," Elena said. "She would have liked you." They walked back to the ranch together, talking about Elena's new sewing customers and Jacob's plans for expanding the cattle operation. It had become their routine over the past few weeks, working together during the day, sharing meals, and spending evenings by the fire talking about everything and nothing. Elena had moved into the spare room once Jacob cleared it out, but she spent most of her time in the main areas of the house. She had gradually added feminine touches, curtains, a tablecloth, some wildflowers in a jar, that made the place feel more like a home than a bachelor's cabin. "I've been thinking," Jacob said as they unhitched the wagon. "About the bed situation." Elena felt her cheeks warm. They hadn't talked much about the broken bed since that first night, though they both stepped around the pieces every time they went into Jacob's room. "I could sleep on the couch permanently," Elena offered. "It's not that uncomfortable." "That's not what I meant." Jacob paused in his work, looking unusually nervous. "I meant I've been thinking about building a new bed. A proper one, designed for 2 people who plan to share it." Elena's heart started beating faster. "Jacob, are you—" "I'm asking if you'd like to make this permanent," Jacob said, setting down the harness and turning to face her fully. "I'm asking if you'd marry me, Elena. Not because you're convenient or practical, but because I've fallen in love with you." Elena stared at him, hardly believing what she was hearing. "You love me? I love how you sing while you cook, even though you can't carry a tune to save your life." I love how you talk to the chickens like they're your friends. I love how you jumped right in to help with that calf without worrying about getting dirty. Elena felt tears starting to flow down her cheeks. I love how strong you are, Jacob continued, and how gentle you are, and how you make everything better just by being here. I love that you're not the woman I thought I wanted, because you're so much better than anything I could have imagined. Oh, Jacob, Elena whispered. I know we haven't known each other very long, Jacob said, pulling her hands into his, and I know this whole situation started as a mistake. But Elena, I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. Elena looked into his eyes and saw everything she had been hoping to find but never dared expect. Love, respect, partnership, and acceptance of exactly who she was. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. Jacob kissed her then, right there in the barn with the horses watching and the chickens clucking around their feet. It was Elena's first real kiss, and it was everything she had dreamed it would be. That evening, they sat together making plans for their future. Jacob showed Elena his ideas for expanding the ranch, and Elena showed him her sketches for the new bedroom furniture they would build together. I want a bed that's strong enough to last for generations, Jacob said, examining Elena's drawings. But I also want it to be beautiful, something we can be proud of. I want it to be ours, Elena said simply. Not your father's bed or some hand-me-down, but something we create together. They spent hours talking about their plans for the bed, for the house, for the ranch, for the family they hoped to have someday. Elena had never felt so included in planning a future, so valued for her opinions and ideas. Elena, Jacob said as they prepared to retire to their separate rooms, I have one more question. What? How do you feel about a Christmas wedding? It's only 6 weeks away, but I don't want to wait any longer than necessary. Elena smiled, thinking about how much her life had changed in just a few weeks. 6 weeks ago, she had been invisible, unimportant Elena who took care of everyone else. Now she was a woman planning her own wedding to a man who loved her exactly as she was. Christmas sounds perfect, she said. It'll give us time to build that bed properly. Jacob laughed. And time for you to make your own wedding dress. Our wedding dress, Elena corrected. I want you to help me choose the fabric. As they said goodnight and went to their respective rooms, both were thinking about the future they were building together. It was nothing like what either of them had planned, but it was turning out better than anything they could have imagined. Outside, the first real snow of winter was beginning to fall, but inside the ranch house everything was warm and bright with promise. The broken bed still sat in pieces, but soon it would be replaced by something new and strong, built specifically for the love that had grown between two people who never expected to find each other. Elena fell asleep that night with her mother's ring on her finger and joy in her heart, finally understanding what it meant to be truly wanted and loved. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, with a light snow falling like wedding confetti outside the small Pine Ridge church. Elena stood in front of the mirror in the church's back room, smoothing down the skirts of her wedding dress with trembling hands. She had made the dress herself from cream-colored silk that Jacob had insisted on ordering from Denver, despite her protests about the expense. The design was simple but elegant, with long sleeves and a fitted bodice that showed off her figure instead of hiding it. For the first time in her life, Elena felt beautiful exactly as she was. You look absolutely radiant, said Mrs. Johnson, who had volunteered to help Elena get ready. Jacob is a lucky man. Elena smiled at her reflection, hardly recognizing the confident woman looking back at her. 6 months ago, she had been invisible Elena, taking care of everyone else and never expecting anything for herself. Now she was about to marry a man who loved her completely and build a life that was truly her own. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Elena? It's time, came Jacob's voice from the hallway. Elena's heart fluttered with excitement rather than nerves. She picked up the simple bouquet of winter greenery and walked out to meet her future husband. Jacob was waiting in the hallway, dressed in his best suit with his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. When he saw Elena, his eyes went wide with wonder. Elena, you're... He stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. I'm what? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. You're perfect, he said simply. Absolutely perfect. They walked into the church together, hand in hand. The small building was packed with their friends and neighbors, people who had welcomed Elena into their community with open arms. Pete from the general store was there, beaming with pride as if he had personally arranged the match. Tom from the post office had brought his wife and children. The Johnson family filled an entire pew, and Mrs. Patterson, Jacob's former housekeeper who had returned from Denver just for the wedding, dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. Pastor Williams conducted a simple but meaningful ceremony, speaking about love, partnership, and the courage it took to build a life together on the frontier. When Jacob and Elena exchanged vows, their words were heartfelt and personal, promising to work together, support each other, and love each other through whatever challenges life might bring. "I promise to be your partner in all things," Jacob said, holding Elena's hands in his, "to value your strength, appreciate your talents, and love you exactly as you are." "I promise to be brave enough to be myself with you," Elena replied, her voice strong and clear. "To work beside you as an equal, and to build a life together that makes us both happy." When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed Elena with such joy and tenderness that half the congregation wiped away tears. The reception was held at the Johnson Ranch, with tables loaded with food that the whole community had contributed. Elena had never experienced anything like it, a celebration where she was the center of attention for all the right reasons, where people genuinely seemed happy for her happiness. "So when are you two planning to take a honeymoon?" asked Mrs. Patterson, cutting an enormous slice of wedding cake. Jacob and Elena exchanged amused glances. "We're taking our honeymoon at home," Elena explained. "We have a new bed to test out." Everyone laughed, knowing the story of the collapsed antique bed that had become legendary in Pine Ridge. Jacob had spent weeks building their new bed by hand, crafting it from strong oak wood with Elena's input on every detail. It was wider than the old bed, with a sturdy frame that could withstand anything, and beautiful carved details that made it a piece of furniture they would treasure forever. As the evening wound down, Elena and Jacob made their way home to the ranch under a sky full of stars. The house looked warm and welcoming with lamplight glowing in the windows, and Elena felt a deep sense of belonging as they crossed the threshold together as husband and wife. "Ready to see your wedding gift?" Jacob asked, leading her toward the bedroom. Elena gasped when she saw what Jacob had done. The new bed dominated the room, beautiful and solid and clearly built to last for generations. But more than that, Jacob had transformed the entire space. There were new curtains at the windows, a soft rug on the floor, and fresh paint on the walls. "Jacob, it's beautiful," Elena breathed, running her hands over the smooth wood of the headboard. "I wanted our bedroom to be something we created together," Jacob said, watching her explore the transformed space. "Not something left over from my old life, but something that belongs to both of us." Elena turned to face her new husband, her heart full of love and gratitude. "It's perfect. We're perfect." They spent their wedding night in their new bed, finally sharing the intimacy they had been building toward for months. The bed was everything Jacob had promised. Strong, beautiful, and unmistakably theirs. More importantly, it was big enough for both of them, comfortable enough for Elena's curves, and sturdy enough to last for the lifetime they planned to spend together. The next morning, Elena woke to the sound of Jacob building up the fire in the kitchen stove. She stretched luxuriously in her new bed, marveling at how different her life had become. 6 months ago, she had been sleeping on a thin mattress in a cramped Boston apartment. Now she was Mrs. Jacob Mackenzie, with a home of her own and a husband who loved her exactly as she was. "Good morning, Mrs. Mackenzie," Jacob said, bringing her coffee in bed. "Good morning, Mr. Mackenzie," Elena replied, sitting up and accepting the cup with a smile. They spent the morning in bed, talking and laughing and making plans for their future. Elena's sewing business was already growing and Jacob's cattle operation was expanding. They talked about the children they hoped to have, the improvements they wanted to make to the house, and the dreams they wanted to pursue together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Maria had been well enough to make the trip?" Elena asked, curled up against Jacob's side. "Never," Jacob said firmly, "because then I would have married the wrong woman and you would still be in Boston thinking you weren't good enough for anyone." Elena smiled, thinking about how wrong they both would have been. "I'm glad I broke your bed," she said. "I'm glad you did too," Jacob agreed, kissing the top of her head. "That old thing never would have been strong enough for what we have together." Elena looked around their bedroom, not his father's or anyone else's, but theirs, and felt a deep sense of contentment. The broken bed had been hauled away weeks ago, but she would always be grateful for the disaster that had brought them together. Outside, snow was falling gently on the ranch they would build together. Inside their warm home, Elena and Jacob were discovering that love wasn't about finding someone who fit your expectations perfectly. It was about finding someone who made you want to build something new and beautiful together. As Elena settled deeper into Jacob's arms, she thought about the advertisement that had started it all, seeking a practical, slim woman for marriage and household management. She had been neither slim nor the woman he was seeking, but she had turned out to be exactly what he needed, and Jacob, who had thought he wanted someone small and undemanding, had discovered that what he really wanted was a partner strong enough to stand beside him through anything life might bring. The new bed held them both comfortably, with room to spare for the love that continued to grow between them. It was built to last through decades of shared mornings, quiet conversations, and peaceful nights. Most importantly, it was theirs, a symbol of the life they had chosen to create together, stronger and more beautiful than anything either of them could have built alone. Years later, when their children asked how their parents had met, Elena and Jacob would tell them the story of the broken bed and the woman who was brave enough to be herself instead of who she thought she should be. They would tell them about taking chances, looking past surface appearances, and building something lasting from the most unexpected beginnings. But on this snowy Christmas morning, as newlyweds in their perfect bed, Elena and Jacob weren't thinking about the future or the past. They were simply enjoying the present moment, the warmth of being truly known and loved, the comfort of finding their place in the world, and the deep satisfaction of discovering that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the moments when everything seems to fall apart. The bed that had broken under Elena's weight had been the beginning of everything good in both their lives, and the bed that Jacob built with his own hands, designed specifically for the woman he loved, would be the foundation for all the happiness yet to come. Elena Mackenzie closed her eyes and smiled, finally understanding that she had never been too much for the right person. She had just been waiting for someone strong enough to appreciate everything she had to offer.